Okay, grade 10. So this is part 2. So I just checked my little video. And when I said left, it meant right, and right meant left. So these are my tubes. Okay, this is the thin tube. In fact, look at the water. It's even stayed in there now that I've taken out of the beaker. So this was showing capillarity. Look how much water is being held in that narrow tube, less in the medium-sized tube, and slightly less in the very wide tube. I just switched the left and right because when I'm seeing it on my screen, I'm talking about what I'm seeing, but when you guys watch it, then it's the other way around. So xylem vessels and tracheates, and especially tracheates, are so narrow that naturally, look at that. Whoops, look at that. How water naturally, I'm not doing anything, I'm just holding it. Look, I'm not doing anything. Okay, so that's showing capillarity, the force of water molecules pulling each other up the narrow tubes. Okay, then there's something else that I want to show you here. Let's get rid of this. So this plant is called Impatiens, and I have it growing in a pot outside. And I always, Impatiens, it's spelled different. Impatiens, the species name, or genus name. And this is what the plant looks like in shame. They look really sad in winter, but then I've put it in the food coloring for quite a few, I think on Friday, okay? But now I've left it, and this poor plant is really not looking happy now. In fact, the leaves have fallen off and they've started to go sort of black on the edges because they don't like absorbing red food coloring water. But I'm hoping I can show this to you, is if I take a cross section, and I've got 2 pieces here. Let's see if we can see it. I hope you're going to see it. I don't know, because what we're trying to see, I don't think you're going to see it. But if I cut across that stem, yeah, you're not going to see it. I cut across that stem, I can actually see the little vascular bundles where the xylem is stained in red. All right, I'm going to have to put a picture up of that for you, okay? Something that I found on the internet, because that's going to be really hard, you know, to take a photograph of. But that's what I'm essentially, that's essentially what I'm trying to do. No, it's not going to focus on it. Okay, but maybe you can see the outer ring of red there. So that's the red food coloring passing up the xylem in the veins of the stem. Oh, bless me. Okay, so let's carry on. All right, let's carry on with our PowerPoint and get this done. Okay, so let's see what we're looking at. All right, so we looked at photometers and we looked at how different factors influence the rate or the speed of transpiration, and you are going to do that little graph activity on page 79 to 80 after watching here. Okay, so now plants, not only do the leaves have cuticles to reduce transpiration, but there's a number of other adaptations. Remember, structure related to function. How can they prevent too much transpiration? So this is section through part of a leaf, and sometimes there are many layers of epidermis. So that's also going to reduce transpiration. And there's the little guard cells, so they're sort of sunken in a pit so that they're not exposed completely to the outside air. So normally the guard cells on the surface, okay, on the lower surface, they've just flipped this around, and it could be many layers of epidermis and sunken stomata to reduce transpiration. There could be fewer stomata. That would make sense. If there are fewer stomata on the lower surface of a leaf, there's going to be less transpiration. All right, and obviously the stomata are mainly found on the lower surface of the leaf. All right, because if there's lots of them on the top, there's too much sunlight, you know, where transpiration would be increased. They could have that thicker, shinier, waxy cuticle, you know, to reflect light and to prevent too much transpiration. We've talked about that. And some leaves, they've got a very thick, waxy cuticle, or even little fine hairs covering them. They almost look silvery in color. And these would be the desert plants or the succulent plants, you know, like the ones at school growing in between in the quads. They've got those sort of gray colored leaves. That's the cuticle. And then maybe little fine hairs preventing too much transpiration, because the hairs would trap water vapor against the leaves. All right. They could close their stomata at midday, which is what we talked about. Like just like you know, if it's hot summer months, you're always told not to go and swim or be out in the midday sun, say between 11 and 3 o'clock. Same for plants. They will transpire too much and wilt. And they could have smaller leaves. So generally plants that grow in desert regions would have smaller leaves to decrease the surface area, therefore less transpiration. But plants, in equatorial forests, tropical forests, the ones down at the bottom could have big leaves because they don't have to worry about too much transpiration. There's so much shade that the plants, the big canopy trees right up there would have smaller leaves because they would transpire more. So it's all about where you're growing, what do you have. Okay, and a cactus. Now, I normally draw this on the board, but what part of the cactus are the leaves? No, it's not these green fleshy structures. Those are actually the storage stems. But these little thorns on the cactus, those are reduced leaves. So not only will they be reduced transpiration because they don't look like proper leaves, but the herbivores ain't going to eat them. And they're storing lots of waters and sugars in those thick fleshy stems. And some people eat, there's certain species of cacti that people eat, because it's nutritious. All right, so there's a lovely table on page 80, which summarizes all of this. I'm just looking here now, and I've given a few more here, and basically I think we've covered everything. So those are ways in which leaves reduce excessive transpiration. Well, this one is called African violet, and I checked the other day, but they used to grow in a fish tank, well, a tank at the back of Mrs. Page's lab, and I see shame they haven't made it through the winter. So these are African violets. They're very pretty flowers, and their leaves are covered with these fine hairs, and those hairs trap water vapor. So less water vapor is going to leave because there's water vapor near to the surface of the leaves, and then less transpiration. Okay. Now, grade 9, and if you weren't at our school in grade 9, it's not a problem. But if a plant loses too much water by transpiration, then it's absorbing from its roots, then the plant wilts. Okay, so we also covered this when we discussed osmosis earlier in the term. All right, and that's because if the plant is losing too much water, even if it closes its stomata, eventually it's not going to have enough water if the soil's too dry. All right, so the vacuoles shrink because they lose water, then they're not as turgid. The cells, we then say, become flaccid and the whole plant wilts. All right, and obviously if you water the plant, then they will, moderate watering, then they will revive. I've got these, they're called peace lilies, and walk past them, wilting a bit, put some water on them because they really don't like being dry. Okay, but obviously if it's gone too far, well, not going to make it, just like a person. Yeah? Okay, so wilting can be due to drought or not watering your poor plants, or like in a desert, if the desert soils are very alkaline, there's lots of salt. So if they don't have water storage structures like cacti and aloe do, with the thick fleshy leaves of an aloe, that plant is going to lose water to the salty soil because water follows salt. And then the leaves are going to the cells become flaccid, the vacuoles lose water because water is moving out of the roots and into the salty soil, and the plant wilts. Okay. Right. Then, sorry, I think I've mixed them up here. But if the soil is saturated with water, then those little root hairs rot. And now there's not enough surface area to absorb water, so the plant's going to wilt. If it's too hot, just like my peace lily plants, if I don't water them often enough, can't have them in direct sunlight because they will wilt. Okay, low temperatures. So just like us, if it's cold, like at the moment, you don't want to get up, you don't want to do anything. But the same, and even, our blood vessels constrict, and then we start feeling cold around the edges. So same with plants. So their vascular system, the xylem and phloem, also slows down, okay, because things will move slower. There won't be as much kinetic energy allowing those water molecules to move up. Okay, very salty soils. That's the one I was explaining just now, like in a desert, the alkaline salty soil, water is going to leave the roots. Okay, so reminder of turgid cells, there's lots of water, water moves into the cells by osmosis, the vacuoles become nice and plump. We say the cell is now turgid and the plant looks nice and healthy. Use too much water, water leaves by osmosis, the vacuoles shrink, the cytoplasm shrinks a bit, the cell walls even cave in a little bit, and the cells are flaccid, so therefore the plant is wilted. Okay, now, this last little thing. So we always talk about transpiration. Now, you can't really see water evaporating from leaves, but there's this. Okay. Now, this makes it look like a magical garden. Now, some plants have got little, instead of not only having guard cells with little openings called stomata, at the tips of their leaves, like there, this is wheatgrass or strawberry plants, just there. It almost looks like at the ends of the veins. At the ends of the veins, there are little pores, and those pores are called hydothodes. And they allow liquid water to pass out. So when the soil is very wet, you know, and so the soil moisture is high and it's early morning, so they're absorbing lots of water. Well, if they don't get rid of some of that water, they're going, well, something's going to happen. So they're not transpiring too much early in the morning because there's not enough sunlight yet. So they actually push water, gets pushed out through these hydothodes, through these big pores, and then you see these little droplets of water on the edges of the leaves. Looks like little pearls on the edges of the leaves. So that's losing liquid water through big pores called hydothodes. And that is called guttation. But losing water vapor through the leaves, through the stomata on leaves and green stems, as water vapor, a gas, that is called transpiration. Okay, Rosie's coming to have a lesson. All right, because if I don't pick her up, she's going to yell. All right, so that is called guttation. Really, really pretty. Early in the morning, when there's not too much sunlight, not enough transpiration, lots of water in the soil, you know, like it just rained all night, or in a forest. Okay, then some plants can lose water by guttation. Okay, it's not morning dew. It's not the condensation of water vapor in the air on the grass, which makes it wet in the morning. It's not. It's water being pushed out of the leaves, forced out of the leaves through these hydothodes, the larger pores. Okay, so the last thing we have to do is how does sap move up and down in the phloem? How do sugars move around the plant? Okay, organic sugars, you know, the plant makes glucose, it can change it into sucrose, and that can move up and down the plant. Like sugarcane. Sugarcane, we get sucrose, we put it in our tea. So wherever the one video said, wherever the sugar is made, that is called the source. All right, and then it goes into the phloem sieve tube cells and goes down the stem. All right, and wherever it gets stored is the sink. Potato tubers, carrot roots, etc. And they can be changed back to glucose to make them sweet, or fructose even, like in a fruit, or it can be stored as starch, like in a potato or in a carrot. Or they can use, you know, the plants can use those sugars to make proteins and lipids. Think of peanuts, you know, underground little storage structures. They won't have sugar, they will have proteins and lipids. That's why we eat them. Okay, so what happens here? So you've got a link between the xylem and the phloem. You know, in our bodies, water and blood flows along arteries, through capillaries, back through veins. You don't have, you know, the link is the capillaries. But in plants, the xylem tissue and the phloem tissue actually work together in a way. So how does it work with xylem tissue? The water is absorbed with minerals, salts from the ground, up through the stem into the leaves, transpires out. More water is pulled up, transpiration pull, and, you know, it's used by the plant along the way, by the cells for turgidity, for photosynthesis, etc. Okay? Phloem is a little bit different. So the glucose is made in the leaves, photosynthesis, and then converted to fructose, and then they can join to make the disaccharide sucrose, and then that moves from the leaf cells into the companion cells, then into the phloem, and then it naturally moves down the phloem, down the sieve tube cells. But it's got to be like a sap, like a watery sap. So high sugars in these sieve tube cells draws water from the xylem. So now it becomes more, what's the word, viscous. It's able to move down easily through the phloem, and then at the bottom here, wherever the sugars need to go, it's actively pumped out of the phloem cells and into the sink, say, for example, the root cells of a carrot, or the potatoes, or the peanuts, or whatever. All right, and then the water goes back into the xylem, and it's this constant movement. All right, so very little detail on this, okay? We're not really interested in any detail at all. The water moves up against gravity, transpiration pull, more transpiring, more water is pulled up. Sugars are made in the leaves, move through the companion cells, into the phloem cells. Water follows to make that more liquidy, like a sap, down with gravity through each sieve tube, through these little perforation end plates, down to where it needs to be stored, fruit, roots, in the nuts, on peanut roots, peanuts on roots, etc. So the sugars get actively pumped out using mitochondrial energy of these cells, companion cells, and into the root cells to be stored as starch, as sugars, as proteins, whatever, and then the water goes back into the xylem. So sap. If you break open some stems, you get that milky liquid, either clear or white. Well, that's the sap. That's the water, the sugars, the amino acids, plant hormones. Plants make hormones too. The minerals from the xylem. That's what's moving up and down the phloem to wherever it's needed. Okay. Here's a diagram on page 86 of the textbook. And I'm looking here now. Okay, Rosie. So on page 85, hang on, Rose. Okay, on page 85, there's what I was trying to show you just now. That if I put a stem in red liquid and you cut through the stem, just get out of here quickly. That's what you see. If you cut through the root, you're going to see the star-shaped xylem in the middle, colored red. But if you cut through the stem, then you see the little veins, the xylem parts of the veins colored in red, or the little veins in the leaf. So go and have a look at page 85. All right, so now let's just finish this off. Okay, so we've gone out again. All right, let's go down. All right, so we're over here. Okay. So we were talking about what is plant sap, and I said, look at the picture on page 86, which is similar to the one that I've just shown you. And then please do, the last activity is on page 87. And there are some insects called aphids, and generally they grow, you find them living on cabbage trees, cabbage plants, or rose bushes, those tiny little green insects, and they're sucking out all of the phloem sap. They've got long little, called a proboscis, like a long tube-shaped mouth part, and then they pierce like a needle. They pierce into the phloem cells and they suck out the phloem sap. So I want you to please answer that question on page 87. There's a nice photograph of the aphid, and there's a table showing the composition of plant sap. All right, and then there's some lovely questions. I see it goes 1, 3, 4, 5, 5. Well, should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so just answer those questions. And here's a picture of what aphids look like. They can either be green or white or sometimes brown. They're sometimes called plant lice because they take over the plant and eventually they can kill it because they're sucking out all the sugars. And that's what they look like close up. And there you can see. Just check here now. I think that's the stylet. I think it's there. There it is. That's the head. These are the antennae. And that's the stylet that they're sticking into like a needle into the phloem to suck out the sap. Now, normally we look at microscope slides in class, but I can't do that until we go back. But I've shown you lots and lots of things. So that's the last little bit on this section. And now we have to simply finish off these questions, mark the worksheet, and then we are done.